few years ago, my wife and I, after exploring various parts of Slovenia, decided to take on Mount Triglav. There are several routes to its 2,864-metre peak, with some being more challenging and requiring fixed cables to help climbers navigate the tricky sections. Looking for a bigger challenge, we chose a route that was less travelled and more remote. The sky was a clear blue, making the trees and plants pop with colour. Birds chirped, and every now and then a soft breeze rustled the leaves. Most of the time the path was straightforward, just dirt and rocks, and the occasional stream to cross. However, the last nights were when odd things began to happen. In the evenings we could hear strange creaking sounds among the trees. Sure, it could have been an animal, but something made me feel watched. For safety reasons, it's usually better to set up camp along the path, or there are often small shelters you can use. However, we never really follow those rules. Instead, we prefer to pitch our tent a bit to the side, mainly to avoid people passing by, especially at night. After exploring the ground a bit, we decided to find our own secluded spot away from the path. Our search led us to a cozy clearing nearby. There, surrounded by nature, we set up our tent, had a nice meal, shared stories, and slept under the starry sky. Around 1:30 in the morning, my wife woke me up by shaking me, saying,
I think someone is walking around our tent.
She said she woke up to the sound of something scraping the side of the tent, like someone was walking around us, drawing with a stick or something. When we hike, I always bring my army knife and a whistle for safety. On such a secluded hike, the wilderness can often hide unexpected surprises. With the bat in hand, we sat quietly, letting the natural sounds of the forest surround us. For what felt like hours, the only sound was the wind rustling through the leaves. Carefully, I stepped out of the tent, my feet barely making a sound on the forest floor. Our campfire had long since gone out, and the pale light of the October moon was the only source of light. I whispered reassuring words to my wife and moved toward the sound with the knife ready. I chose not to use the flashlight right away, instead navigating with the limited moonlight so as not to give away my position. I moved to a tree, pressed my back against it, and listened for sounds. After a moment of silence, I looked to the left, and a short distance away, I saw something that sent chills down my spine. Farther away, there was the silhouette of a man looking in my direction. The person must have seen me leave the tent and watched me the whole way to the tree. My hands were shaking from fear as I tried to turn on the flashlight to shine it towards the person, but by the time I got it on, the figure was gone. I didn't really feel like going further to look around. My heart rate was already too high, and I felt the need to calm down. I went back to the tent and briefly told my wife what happened without giving any details about the figure I saw. I didn't want to scare her too. Before I went back to sleep, I took another walk around the campsite. That's when I noticed a large branch on the ground that I hadn't seen before. This confirmed that someone had indeed been outside our tent. I chose not to mention this the next day. We still had 2.5 days left on our trip. The next day we picked up our pace. We started late in the morning because we had slept in due to the night's events. We aimed to cover as much ground as possible to minimize risks. When it was time to pitch the tent again, we chose a spot closer to a slope. The entrance to this campsite could now only be accessed from one direction, which protected us from anyone approaching from the front. But all day, I had a feeling that something was following us. Even though I had no direct evidence, I felt something was off. We set up camp, made some food, and then went into the tent. I made sure my wife had her pepper spray close by, and I kept the knife close to me, promising her I'd stay alert. She managed to fall asleep after a while, but I stayed awake listening to the night sounds. After a few hours, I also began to drift off. Suddenly, we were woken up by the sound of someone touching our stuff outside. I stayed very still, and it seemed the person had stopped right outside our tent where our faces were. They stood there for several seconds, as if they could see us through the fabric. I've never been so scared. But after a while, the person left. It felt like they were debating what to do, but eventually changed their mind. We lay in silence for about 30 minutes without speaking. Finally, I slowly stepped out of the tent. What was left of our campfire was just a faint glow. Standing in the middle of the campsite, I still felt something was wrong, like someone was watching me again. I told my wife to start packing up the most essential items and that we had to leave now. We grabbed all our valuables and left behind the tent and some heavier items. Right now, traveling light was the priority. While walking along the path, I kept checking behind us to make sure I didn't see the figure again. I felt nervous all over, and it felt like I was about to have a panic attack. We still had a long way to go, and it seemed we were alone on this part of the hike since we hadn't seen another hiker the entire time we'd been out. It really felt like we were in danger. Even if the person, or whatever it was, had left the campsite, they might have checked if we had any weapons and then planned to come after us. We had been walking for over an hour now, and the forest wasn't as thick, but the wind was much stronger. Then I heard a loud crack, like a big branch breaking, and we quickly looked behind us. There was the same silhouette from the night before, the same eerie figure, just standing there, motionless. I kept looking back but saw nothing, but my gut told me they were still there for a long time. We were extremely tired by this point. Eventually, we reached a larger road where we managed to hitch a ride back to the starting point. From what I saw, it didn't seem like the person had anyone with them, but what worried me the most was how this person could move in the dark without any light and without any special gear out here. I have no idea what they wanted, and won't be going back to find out.